Welcome to the CGI Canada podcast, where we've curated the finest sermons, lectures, and podcast episodes from congregations across Canada and the U.S. In a world that often feels overwhelming, delving into the teachings of God provides both clarity and guidance for living a more fulfilling and godly life. Through our selections, we aim to offer insights and a blueprint for navigating life's challenges with faith and wisdom. We hope you find inspiration and enlightenment in the content we've assembled for you.
Philippians 4, verses 6 to 7, Paul has this to say. He says, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus." So that's what Paul has to say in Philippians. Now turn with me to 1 Peter 5. 1 Peter 5, also verses 6 and 7. 1 Peter 5, verses 6 and 7. Peter has this to say. "Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time, casting all your anxieties on him, because he cares for you." But both of these men were apostles taught by Jesus, and they're echoing the same theme that Jesus himself thought he needed to expound upon in Matthew 6. Matthew 6, I'm not going to turn there, I'm not going to read it, but you, as a cross-reference, Jesus goes into the same theme of not being anxious. And if you're looking for a title for this sermon, it's "Do Not Be Anxious" in Matthew 6, and he covers this from verse 25 to 34. So just you can look that up on your own later. But Peter and Paul here are kind of echoing this theme that Jesus is talking about. Now, the words in 1 Peter and Philippians are basically the same words that Jesus uses for worry. It's the same Greek word, and so they're using, when Jesus says worry, it's the same word that Peter and Paul use here for anxious. So anxiety and worry are basically the same idea. The context of both of these letters is similar. One is to specific church and one is to many churches, but these churches are both primarily Gentile churches, and they're churches that were built by Paul and Peter as they went out into the greater world, out from Jerusalem. Peter and Paul likely wrote both of these letters around 62 or 63 AD. So that's the time frame of the writing. So Nero was in charge. Paul would soon be killed, just shortly after writing Philippians, and Peter would be killed shortly thereafter. So shortly after Paul's murder, Peter is also killed. Both groups being addressed at the time of the writing were under persecution by Roman authorities. So these churches that Peter and Paul are writing to are under persecution by Rome. And we know that this is just the beginning. So in 62 and 63 AD, when these letters are written, we know that this is just the beginning of the persecution that happens, because we know through history and the writings of John and other historical characters such as Polycarp, who actually specifically addresses the church in Philippi later on in one of his letters. And in that letter, he specifically addresses the fact that they're being persecuted by the Romans. So we know that this is the beginning of the persecution, and that they're going to be persecuted for decades thereafter. Now, sometimes we think these people are different than us in many ways, and they are different than us in many ways, but in other ways they're quite similar. They would have been regular people that would have experienced the usual stresses of everyday life, if not more so than us. They would have experienced these stresses, the things that we call stresses that cause us anxiety. They would have been familiar with these topics that we have in our lives, these things that we have in our lives, such as a rebellious child that won't straighten out their ways. I left mine at home. No, Jack's actually at church in Kitchener. But a rebellious child, they would have been, having some of those anxieties. They would have had the loss of loved ones. In fact, probably more than us back then. Death would have been a more familiar refrain in their life. Serious illness in the family, they would have known that. They would have had the strain of looking out for their elder parents more than we would, as for that matter, because they didn't have retirement homes to send them to. They would have had to look after them themselves. They may have experienced the stress that goes on with wondering whether or not their business plan would be successful, whether or not their business was going to succeed or not because of what was going on in their area. They would have had the threat of war from time to time. Again, that would have been an anxiety that would have been common for them. Maybe they would have had specific worries, like those are generalized worries, but sometimes it would have been something more specific, like if you're my daughter, she's constantly on edge that a spider might drop from the ceiling and land on her shoulder. That is an anxiety that she carries with her. If you're my son, you would have the anxiety that somebody might actually play with the Lego that you built, as opposed to leaving it alone and looking at it as a piece of art like it's supposed to be, right? So those are the things that might make you anxious that are specific to you. They would have had some of those specific anxieties as well. Some might experience the anxiety of coming up to lead songs. Dave, of course, is impervious to that kind of stress, but some of us would be anxious if we came up here and did that. There could be the stress of chronic pain or illness. You may wonder, is that lump just a cyst or is it cancer? Those type of things. Maybe it's relationship stresses. They would have experienced those as well. The anxiety of trying to find a suitable mate, and then once you found that mate, the anxiety of dealing with the underwear and socks thrown underneath the corner of the room's table. You might have stresses with friendships. They would have had those as well. Maybe you have a friend that cheers, for Satan's team, the New York Yankees, instead of cheering for God's team, the Toronto Blue Jays. How do you deal with that type of person? All these things that they would have been familiar to them are also familiar to us. These are things that they would have had in their lives, what we call normal stresses of life. They would have had those things. But on top of that, they would have had some other burdens. At this point in time, the Jewish community has now come to hate them and basically will rat them out to the Roman authorities whenever they could. And of course, there is that little detail of the Roman Empire with an emperor who in the near future was intent on either killing, maiming, or imprisoning these people. So they had those stresses on top of the normal everyday stresses. So these are the people that Peter and Paul are writing to. This is the type of people that had normal everyday stresses, but on top of that, they would have had more overreaching stresses, such as the threat of the Roman Empire and the Jewish community going after them. And we know that in short order, from Revelation, John's going to write to some of these people that they're going to experience severe trials, the same type of trials that the churches in Revelation were to experience. And when we talk about anxiety and worry, we often use it interchangeably with fear. But anxiety is a little bit different than that. It's a sense of concern, warranted or unwarranted, about something that might happen to you based on your circumstances. Something that is, but it's future driven. It's something that you have anxiety about, something that might happen in the future. It's a sense of dread about what is about to happen in the future, not what's happening to you at that point in time. So things are in your life now causing you anxiety because you're worried about what that means about the future. And so this worry or anxiety can take over your life. It's something that you can think about all the time. Arthur Summers Roach says this, anxiety is a little stream of fear trickling through the mind that, if encouraged, cuts a deep channel into which all other thoughts are drained. So the idea is that this little trickle of fear that's running through your mind that you're concerned about can cause you so much concern that it becomes this thing to which everything else is drawn into. So you can't think about anything else in your world without also considering this anxiety in your life. Another quote which I like, which is from the famous philosopher named Anonymous, is, "Anxiety is like a toddler. It never stops talking. It tells you you're wrong about everything, and it wakes you up at 3 a.m. And that's something that often if you wake up at night and suddenly your mind starts thinking about the things that have happened, and you think, well, what if this happens, or what if that happens, and you become anxious, you can't fall asleep, and then you're up until 5 a.m. and you finally fall asleep and you wake up exhausted in the morning. Some statistics that tell us this problem is getting worse in our society. I'll provide you with some statistics. In 2024, 43, and I don't have Canadian statistics, but I have American, UK statistics. I'm assuming they'll be quite similar. 43% of Americans said that they were more anxious in 2024 than they were the year before, which is up from 37% in 2023. So in 2023, 37% of the population said they were more anxious in 2023 than in 2022, which was a rise again from the year before that. On average, 1 in 5 American adults experience some form of anxiety disorder. So that's 2 out of 10 experience some form of anxiety disorder. which is a diagnosable condition, right? This is a diagnosable condition. In the UK, the numbers are slightly higher. It's about 22%, so just over 2 in 10, or just over 1 in 5. Teenagers and young adults have been especially hit by this increase of anxiety. This has coincided with the advent of social media and just the overall increase in media saturation. When I was a kid, you had to wait till 6 o'clock to get the news. Now you put on CNN or Fox News and you get or CBC, you get the news all day long, 24/7. And then on top of that, there's social media where kids are being bombarded with these events all the time. And it's almost exclusively, it is rarely a uplifting story. It's almost exclusively negative information. We can be thankful that we can go to God, the creator of the universe, who brought us into existence, that we rebelled against. But we be thankful that he wants to have a relationship with him, that we can go to that God, that by his grace, that he has saved us from destruction, and that we can go to that God and leave our troubles in his hands, and that the God who's in control of everything will listen to us. That's the thankfulness we go there with. Not thankful that we have the trouble, but thankful that we can go to him with that trouble.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the CGI Canada podcast. Click on the link in the description to watch the full episode.